Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Daily Dispatch. We are here, Michelle and I, with Professor Jeff Jarvis, who is many things. First of all, he's a media critic, and I think the best media critic in the country because he calls it like he sees it and he doesn't bend the knee to anybody. He's a journalism professor and, which I'm very excited to talk to him about, the upcoming author of the upcoming book, Hot Type. Jeff, welcome to the show. Let's dispense with the big upcoming news that you have. What's the book about? And let's talk about it.
Oh, well, thank you for that. First, thank you for having me. I'm
Of
honored to
course.
be here. It came because Julie spoke the truth on MSNBC as she does, and I went on the socials and just said thank you. So
Mm.
I'm glad you were out there cutting through the bullshit, and I appreciate that. Hot Type is a book about is a cultural history of the linotype, and you're both too young to know what a linotype was, I suspect. But it was the machine that set type a line at a time in hot metal, and this is what led to mass media. This is
Wow.
what led to the scale in media and all the bad that came from that. And it's a cultural history of the beginnings of mass media and also some great stories about Mark Twain went bankrupt trying to compete with the linotype. The story of the gendering of typesetting as male and typewriters as female, and the labor fights that went around about these machines. And it ends with the creation of PostScript and thus desktop publishing and the end of all that was.
So this goes back, if you're talking about Mark Twain, this goes back to what, about 150 years that this all began? Late
Yeah, the
or
1880s,
mid to
1890s
late?
is when the
Yeah.
story starts.
And I guess the Gilded Age kind of overlapped with that, right? Were these people involved in the mass mediaization of media, or is that when William Randolph
Absolutely.
Hearst did that
It's
whole
Mark
group?
Twain is a Zelig in the tale that comes back often because he was a typesetter.
Right.
And then he obviously wrote his books, but he also briefly owned a part of a newspaper. And it definitely is a tale of the Gilded Age. One of the characters is a guy named Whitlaw Reid who took the New York Tribune out from underneath Horace Greeley and turned it from a progressive newspaper, a great progressive newspaper, into a conservative, business-oriented rag. And he's the villain of the tale.
The
But what's interesting,
Rupert Murdoch of the 19th century, if you will.
in a way, he was, and he was the first prototype of that media executive who cared more than anything about capital and equity.
Right.
And that's when we saw media change. Before, do I have my little prop here? I don't know if I have it handy. I don't. Yes, I do. This is my favorite little prop for those of you on video. This is a directory of every newspaper that was in America in the year 1900.
Wow.
It is thick for those of you listening. I'll pat it on the desk and the camera shakes. In New York City in 1900, there were 46 daily newspapers. There was a plurality and a pluralism to media there that as media became the domain of capital, then it consolidated, it shrunk. You got fewer, much bigger publications, and you got this idea of mass media and all the ills that come from that.
So, it strikes me also that the rise of this was also the rise of the New York Times to some extent, right? Like Adolph Fox owned the Times, if I'm not mistaken, and then the Sulzberger family, they all intermarried. But why is it that of all those 40 some newspapers, that it was the New York Times that survived, and also the rise of the Times, I guess, overlaps with the period that you're talking about. So what is the common denominator there?
Good luck and genes, probably, that let them hold on. Things could have turned out very, very differently. In the 1960s, we saw the huge crippling strike that ended up killing 6 of 9 newspapers in New York. You were left only with the Times and the News, which are the only profitable ones, and the Post. And there was a time when the Herald Tribune talked about merging with the Times. And Orville Dreyfus, who was then the head of the Times, was all for it until he keeled over dead. And so the Sulzberger who took over decided against it, and that's what eventually killed the Herald Tribune, and with it, that sense of diversity in American media.
What I think is interesting, and Michelle, sorry, I'll let you jump in, but I just want to
No, you're good.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is that you're kind of seeing the same thing here, right? Where you're seeing great old newspapers, for good or ill, being taken over. The Washington Post, of course, comes to mind, um, and by oligarchs, I don't know how else to describe it, who have a vested business interest in a particular point of view. And it's not that this only goes back to the 19th century. I mean, you saw this happening with the Dolly Schiff version of the New York Post, which was then sold, a good liberal newspaper, which was then sold to Rupert Murdoch, who promised he would never screw around with editorial. We saw what happened now. Um, Same thing with Jeff Bezos, who promised he'd never screw around with editorial at the Washington Post. I am old enough to remember, as I'm sure you are too, how when Rupert Murdoch made a play for the Dow Jones, which owns the Wall Street Journal, he promised not to screw around with editorial. We saw how well that went. So is this anything new, or I guess this goes back, the book that you're about to publish, this goes back 150 years, if not more.
I think it is new to this extent. I think what we're witnessing, and this is the subject of the next book I'm researching, the death of mass media. And I think we're in the final death throes of it. And there'll be survivors. There'll be a few survivors. It's a winner take most market. A few years ago, before the Washington Post got ruined by Will Lewis and Jeff Bezos entirely, and it was still in the hands of a decent editor, 2/3 of all subscriptions to news sites in the U.S. went to 3 brands: New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. It was winner take most. Everybody else spread all the rest, and they're all dying. Most American newspaper chains are now owned by hedge funds, which are milking them dry. Magazines, and I love magazines. I started a magazine called Entertainment Weekly. They're all dying. You can't find a newsstand in New York. You can't buy a magazine. I've literally tried to buy copies of the New Yorker around New Jersey, and I can't find it anywhere. So magazines are dying. Linear television on broadcast, the audience is geriatric and dying. Cable has cooties, and that's why it's all being put off onto funeral ice flows. Nobody's figured out streaming yet. Old big media are dying, and I say, good riddance. I devoted my life to mass media. I worked for big newspapers. I worked for big magazines. That's what I did, and I have regrets. And that's why I'm very glad that you're doing what you're doing here, not there. I think it's critical when you appear on MSNBC or CNN and suffer the indignities that come along with that, especially on CNN, especially from Scott Jennings, because somebody has to fight back. But that's not what media or journalism or Vox Populi should be in a democracy. And so what I celebrate is that we're going to move from the oligopoly of media as was, and we're going to return to a pluralism of many voices. And that's confusing. We think of that as fragmentation. It's not. It's returning to a more natural state of media before it got taken over by a few people who had the capital to buy the printing presses and the linotypes and the broadcast towers.
I think more people need to hear that, honestly, because I think that there is people are allergic to too many voices. For them, it's too many voices. Oh, how do we sift through? How do we know what's real? How do we check things and journalistic, best practices, things like that. I say that, earlier this year, I was at just a private event with a bunch of people from the 19th, which was, I think, under the umbrella of the Washington Post, founded by women. It's a great publication. They do great work. But there was a very well-known cable journalist in the room. And because the conversation went to independent media, people need to invest in independent media, independent voices. This is the future. This is how we fight back. And this person stepped forward and said, that's all nice and good and everything, but I just want people to still appreciate and support, big media, and because we have fact checkers and we have researchers and we're doing, so I think about that often, because every time I see her on TV, I'm like, okay. Because what good is that when you have Julie on these panels, right? And she's having to push back and fight back against the Scott Jennings and the Jillian Michaels and the people, what good is all of that research? What good is all that fact checking? If you're platforming people on your show, and other shows on your network who say the earth is flat, to Julie's point, that the earth is round. So, what do you say to people like that? How do you argue against that? Because that is going to be the last push, I think, right? Is we're the grown-ups. We're doing the grown-up stuff.
Amen and well said. The entitlement of journalists is awe-inspiring. The belief that they do great work and that they are somehow above all the rest of us and that we need them. Look at the failure of journalism in America's fall into fascism. They have failed us, full stop. The New York Times, and I've loved the New York Times. I subscribe to the New York Times. It's the biggest and best we've had. I'll use the past tense there. And I want it to be better. I don't know whether it can be at this point. The Washington Post is a complete failure, and that hurts me more because it was providing competition to the Times.
Yeah.
CNN is scared to death of its own shadow now, as Ellison and Barry possibly approach them. These institutions all act as if they are the virtue that we need right now. And what they really have in the end, the thing they have more than anything else, is lawyers who can protect them better than the rest of us against the attacks from the likes of Donald Trump. But we are in full-throated fascism in this country, in my belief. And the New York Times, and I've been at events with journalists where I try to say this, oh no, we don't want to use that label. We don't want to say that. When you don't use that label, you can't then explain it. You can't then explore what we're going through. If you don't call racism, racism, and fascism, fascism, and sexism, sexism, you cannot then report on those things. And instead, it's a constant prevarication. Latest, on the socials, I use the hashtags Broken Times and Broken Post with the receipts of these failures often. The latest one was about the Heritage Foundation and the New York Times accusing or using the accusations of clear racism on behalf of its director in supporting Tucker Carlson and Fuentes,
Right.
and they called it a gaffe.
A gap.
A gaffe.
I want a glimpse into the New York Times thesaurus that they use to like any word except the words that we need to be using. And I want to throw this up because I keep this on my phone. I sent this over to my laptop right before we came on. This side by side. This is back in, I wish I knew what year this was, but it's Berlin, December
1924, it says there, I think.
Yeah.
No,
Does it?
It
Okay.
has to be later than that, though. No, it has to be later than that.
Yeah, I'm
I can't
not
read. My eyes.
Yeah, me neither. And I'm like,
No. Well, no, it doesn't have to be
It
later
must be
than that.
34.
He came out of
this
of
is
prison.
right when he got out of prison,
He
right?
got out of prison. So
Oh, okay,
it
so it is. Yeah,
was-
okay.
Yeah, it is
It's
24.
24,
You're right.
yes.
Yeah.
And it says, for anybody listening, it says, Hitler tamed by prison. Released on parole, he is expected to return to Austria. And it's just, this man who went to jail and he did this bad thing, but he's a softer man now. And side by side, here is this opinion essay from the New York Times in 2023 by Kristen Anderson. And the headline says, "How Trump is running differently this time." And it's, again, failing not just the American people, but Western democracy. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's unbelievable.
But I think it's even worse than that now because you talked about how it used to be, and when I came up, and look, I got to Fox News in 2004, and I remember the very first thing that I had to kind of debate was whether John Kerry really was a war hero.
Oh, the Swift boat crap.
I
Yeah.
remember saying, what does he have to do? Show you the shrapnel in his body to underscore that he in fact did go to Vietnam and did get injured in Vietnam. Okay, that was the typical kind of bullshit that Fox engaged in. But at least nobody, and I have to listen, I've certainly had very high profile differences with Roger Ailes, but nobody ever stopped me from saying what I wanted to say.
Right.
Ever. The difference now is startling. Michelle, I don't know whether you have that clip of what happened with me and Julian Michaels and Scott Jennings on that show.
I do.
I'm going to play for 1 second, not because I want to make a larger point. So you don't have to play the whole thing, but just play a little bit of it.
Yeah. Here we go.
Gone into the Smithsonian, and he's effectively now has some random person deciding what is appropriate for the Smithsonian to teach in terms of American history, things that don't offend parts of the MAGA base, right? So we're now literally reviewing parts of American history and parts of American culture to make sure it comports with dear leader and what the MAGA
Can we
organization
address
wants.
some of those things that
So-
are in there? Because have you looked at some of the things that
Yeah,
are being reviewed?
slavery was a bad thing that we should talk about.
Okay,
Like, he forgives
He's
me for
not
saying
whitewashing slavery. So
he's not?
He's not. No,
Okay.
he's not. And you cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what every single exhibit does. But let's talk about the fact that when you
In the
look
United States.
let's talk about the fact.
I mean, slavery in America was a
Do you realize
system
that
of white
only
supremacy.
less than 2% of white Americans own slaves?
But it was a system of white
Do
supremacy.
you
know,
realize that
African
slavery
Americans
is
were
thousands
slaves
of
and
years old?
White people were
Do you know
the slave
who
owners.
was the first race to
I didn't
try
realize
to
this was
end
controversial.
slavery?
Wait a second.
Well,
I'm
what's
sorry,
controversial?
I'm very surprised
This is
that
an
you're trying to
extraordinary exercise in historical revisionism. I would say.
I'm really
Historical
surprised.
revisionism. Do you realize that
Jillian, I'm surprised that you're trying to litigate who was the beneficiary of slavery and
I'm
who
not.
was not.
What I'm trying to tell you
in
is
the
that
context of American history.
Okay.
In the context of American history, what are you saying is incorrect by
What
by
I'm saying is
that
you
it was white
cannot-
people oppressing black
Every
people?
single thing is like, oh, no, this is all because white people bad. And that's just not the truth. Like, for example, every single exhibit, I have a list of every single one. Like, people migrated from Cuba because white people bad. Not because of Castro. Yes, no, it's in there. That's what I'm saying. You don't actually know what's in there. Do you know that when you walk in the front door,
what exactly?
the first thing you see is the gay flag?
Jillian, you have a lot of stuff in front
Yeah,
of
I
you.
do,
What
because I don't,
exactly
because here's the
are
thing.
you talking about?
Okay, I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
There's one called Change Your Game, right? This has been an installation there. Is gender testing fair in sports? Does that, and then it goes on to talk about how it's complex to do gender testing in sports. It's not complex. It's basic science. That's untrue. It's XX chromosome, XY chromosome. That's sports. Is it fair to have biological men competing against biological women in sports? No. But why is this in the Smithsonian? So it's been completely.
So I
So,
just
I
to
just
keep
wanna say
myself from
something
jumping
about
out the window, I'm gonna
Yeah.
stop that.
I want to say something about that. Okay. First of all, we're debating whether slavery is good or bad. So in my mind, we're debating whether we should talk about slavery, and we're debating whether the earth is flat versus round. But I'm going to say, Jeff, it's even worse than you think. And I don't think, certainly you and I have never talked about this. I really haven't talked much about this. In that same segment, I went after Scott Jennings about something that was factual, but he really didn't like. And in the commercial break, he turned to Abby. He said, every time she comes after me. I have never been back on that show. I have been banned. Jillian Michaels has been back, I believe.
Of course.
But that's it. I used to do that show once a week.
Yeah.
I called Jillian Michaels out on
slavery.
And when I called Scott Jennings out on whatever live the day he was perpetuating that day, that's it. Never again. And I just want to say that to say it's not even that when we used to have these debates about was John Kerry really a war criminal, a war hero, or was John Kerry not really a war hero? Like, okay, that was stupid because certain things are factual, right? Yes, you might not agree with John Kerry's politics if you're a Republican, but there's no doubt that he actually went to Vietnam and got injured. Now it's even worse. Now they don't like what you're saying. CNN will just not allow you to be on air because that might offend Donald Trump.
So media, the credulity of media and the idea that they are a voice for all, that they are the mass, put them in the position where they went from the manipulator to the manipulated.
Yep.
They are vulnerable and they don't see it themselves and they don't understand what's happening themselves and they're too haughty about it to get there. And there's no end of absurd things that are said and they won't call it what it is. I urge journalists these days to read or reread Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism. It is the playbook for what is happening right now. And one of the key things that she says in there is that loneliness, and one can be lonely in a crowd, one can be lonely in a mob. Loneliness is the basis of totalitarianism, for it makes people separated from their communities and separated from the nation and vulnerable to the siren call of the fascist. And then she also says that in this time, people attach themselves to abstract notions. And that really struck me because it's I don't believe that the average American every day wakes up and says, that guns and abortion are the most important things in their lives and that slavery didn't happen. These are tropes and memes that are put out there as loyalty tests. If you're willing to say this crap, then you belong in this group. But what it does on the media level is that it sets the agenda then for the discussion. So when we had the cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio, I was on a podcast with David Folkenflik of NPR, and he's defending big old media. And he's saying that, well, the Wall Street Journal sent a reporter, shoe leather journalism, to Springfield and found out that the cats and dogs were alive. They hadn't been eaten. And I said, that misses the point entirely.
Right.
It was never about the cats and dogs. It was about being able to say these absurd things so that you could then put that into the discussion, and then media follow it up and do story after story for the cats and dogs, and they miss the bigger picture, which is the fucking fascism.
Right.
And they're not seeing it, and they're not doing it. The last time I was on with Mr. Jennings, maybe soon Governor Jennings, for all we know.
Oh my God.
He wishes, but it's never going to happen.
Yeah, it was the Jimmy Kimmel moment.
Yeah.
And I asked, is he going to be on? And then Booker said, yeah. And I said, I don't know. And then I thought, for Jimmy, you got to do it, right? So I go in and I talk about the Ellisons now, the mini Murdochs having taken over CBS, now next looking at CNN. And so I'm on CNN saying this. And the truth is that I was put there so I could say it because they couldn't.
Right.
But there was this moment, as soon as I said, and I made this into a little GIF, an animated GIF. As soon as I said that, Jennings turned to the camera with a sly grin, like, you just wait. You just wait until Barry's in charge, and he's the king, and he's the anchor, right? They've won. Our mass media are either Fox and company, or they are complicit, or they are purposefully, willfully naive and credulous. And they have failed us. And I think between now and whatever follows is going to be messy, right? How do people find you in this messy world? I think part of the problem is that we thought that the only things that mattered were the things that were huge. Mass media reset our scale of significance in society to this level that you have to be big. No, your voices here matter. You doing this matters. You providing an opportunity for other voices to be heard is what the future is going to be. So I really, really regret and lament and condemn the fact that you haven't been back on CNN.
I mean, I've been back on CNN, but just not on that show.
On that show, but at some point,
I don't care.
Make your own.
No, but that's what I'm doing. I mean, I'm not saying this to say woe is me. I'm just saying
woe is them.
To your point of what we're having, and then it gets even crazier because you have this quote from Mark Thompson, who I think last we checked was like a real respected journalist. He's saying Scott's like D'Artagnan. Speaking about Jennings, he's got a sword out and he's got about 4 Democrats against him, but he spiked them all off. That's much more like it. I think he's a worthy opponent, as it were, for the Democrats in the room, but that's false because anybody who's a worthy opponent to Scott is not allowed in the room. Scott complains. I don't know if he complains to Thompson, but he certainly complains to whoever, because if you see who's up against Scott now, it's nobody who has the temerity to call Scott out on his bullshit. It's people who are like, well, my friend Scott, I respect what my friend Scott has to say. You don't respect what Scott has to say. Scott's a liar.
And one presumes I've heard that he's paid a lot of money to do that, which is to say that's what they value.
Right. And so, when I see Mark Thompson saying he's like D'Artagnan, no, D'Artagnan could fend off people. But this guy's a liar. Like, I've been Scott. I mean, that was my job at Fox, right? I had a show where I was the sole Democrat and I had to fend off 4 Republicans every single day on a show called Outnumbered, or The Five. Right. And the difference is never did I call up Suzanne Scott, who's now the head of Fox News, or Roger Ailes, and say, oh my God, these people are being really nasty to me. I don't want them on the show with me.
Right.
Julie, I want to ask you a question about the Fox time, if I may.
Yeah. Sure.
So I too must now confess that I received Rupert Murdoch's filthy lucre. I was the TV critic at TV Guide when he owned it. And I agree with you. I think there came a moment when something changed. when you could be there, you could say what you wanted to say, you weren't told what not to say. But then it became completely and utterly different. Can you mark that moment?
Um,
Or what caused that to go fully overboard into full propaganda?
um, um, so, I think it was always kind of full on propaganda.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that it's interesting. I've often wondered, and I say this as somebody who sued Fox News, certainly Roger
Yes,
Ailes.
yes, yes.
So I'm not,
And thank you for
I'm
that.
not saying, yeah, I'm not saying this in defense of Roger Ailes at all, but I often wonder if Roger Ailes had lived and none of that happened, um, is what would have happened to Trump? Because the one thing about Ailes that I always thought was very fascinating is when he fired, or I don't know what the right term for it is, but when he and Glenn Beck parted ways, he created The Five, which now is the number one show, I think, not just in cable news, but one of the top shows in cable, period. And what he always said about The Five was, it's not called The Five because it's on at 5 o'clock, and it's not called The Five because there are 5 people on the show. It's called The Five because I could walk out to 6th Avenue, pluck 5 random people off the sidewalk, and each of those people would do just as well as the 5 people I have on now. And he's not wrong about that. I was on that show. I left. Bob Beckel was on the show. He left. Um, uh, they've had Kimberly Guilfoyle was on that show, or Bowl. I mean, they're like, except for the 2 people who are Dana Perino and Greg Gutfeld, everybody else on that show has cycled out. And if Perino or Gutfeld drop dead tomorrow, it would be fine. They just replace them with 5 other, 2 other people. And so I think what Ailes always felt was nobody was bigger than the network. And it turned out even he was not bigger than the network.
Yeah,
I think Trump tried to be and eventually became bigger than the network. In other words, the tail wags the dog. And I don't know that that would have been allowed to happen under Ailes. I think Ailes would have undercut him.
That's a really good analysis, I think. One of the other problems is, and this is why I'm glad we're having this discussion, the rest of journalism and media do not treat Fox as the political actor or the propagandistic actor it is. They don't cover it as that. The Times this week did have a story about Epstein not being on Fox. And that's the first time I've seen that in ages. One of my former students when I was at CUNY, named Juliet Jeske, does a business feature she calls Decoding Fox News. She watches Fox News, so you have to.
Yes, she's great.
She is
Really
the greatest.
great.
I'm very proud that I used some of the money I had at CUNY to fund her beginnings, and she's making it on ramen noodles, but she's doing God's work. And she is a lone voice. There's a few others, Aaron Rapar and a few others out there who cover Fox News as the malign actor it is. And it's not just Fox, of course, now it's the others. But instead, they treated it as if it's part of the journalism sorority and fraternity. And thus they normalize that too.
Yeah.
Well, and you have people like Jake Tapper who will consistently do that, right? Like there are people at other, at other networks who consistently do that, which I find so fascinating because there is listen, CNN's not going in a good direction. And it's not, trending in a way that I think all of us who remember CNN back from the Ted Turner days would have wanted it to go. It remains to be seen what happens to MSNBC. I think you're absolutely right that mainstream media is kind of dying, and maybe not so fast death.
MSNBC is kind of all we have left in big old media, would you say? Or is there anything else that you think is salvageable, maybe?
I don't know what is salvageable. I mean, the problem is they're all owned by corporations, right? And so ultimately, they have to answer to the advertisers.
Yeah.
If Comcast or whoever owns Versant now, it's spun off, gets a phone call saying, hey, if you continue to have Lawrence O'Donnell on, who's probably the strongest anti-Trump person, or Nicole Wallace, or even Rachel Maddow.
I take, Nicole Wallace would be for me.
Yeah, if you have them on, we're going to retaliate against you in your corporate life. The one thing I learned at Fox when I was there is we're all just pieces on a chessboard, the quote unquote talent, right? I mean, they weren't even masking that. For all that everybody thinks these people who are on TV are like celebrities, they're the worst of the worst in terms of how they're treated because they're just little pawns in a much larger corporate game.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
that's where I want to point to Joe Scarborough and Mika in the morning, because
Go there, please.
a lot of people feel the way that I feel, and I'm sure that we all feel, that the day that they went on air and said we went to Mar-a-Lago after the election, we were like, never again. I am never watching this show again. Oh my God. How can you spend week after week after week calling him a fascist? Mika had these panels with women. Now I run I run a super PAC that is focused on women's rights. So, we were very focused and watching the work and the conversations that she was having. And then for her to turn around a week later and go down and have conversations with him because we're journalists. Excuse me? So I want to play this clip. Seth Moulton, this was on October 31st. Seth Moulton was on Morning Joe and talking about the issues at hand. And obviously, this is before the emails came out. This is before the end of the shutdown. I'm just going to play this conversation.
If you are one of the people like him who took advantage of young girls with Jeffrey Epstein, then we're going to sort of make that go away. I mean, fundamentally, Speaker Johnson...
We don't have evidence that he took advantage of young girls with Jeffrey Epstein.
Right. Just common sense be damned.
I'm not saying common sense be damned. I'm saying facts. Let's look at the facts. Is he in the Epstein files?
He's obviously in the Epstein files, and the reason that fundamentally Speaker Johnson has us on vacation is because he does not want to seat the newly elected Democratic representative.
Right, but you said he
Arizona.
took advantage of young girls. You have absolutely no evidence of that.
I think it's pretty obvious that that's what's going on.
You think it's pretty obvious?
I do. And I think it's pretty obvious to the Republican.
John Lemire, any reporting on this?
Well, we know that he's friends with Epstein. We know the birthday card was in there. I mean, he has not been accused of any wrongdoing.
No.
I think that's the point you're trying to make. But also, certainly here, that we know that Speaker Johnson has kept the House out of session, in large part to not seat the woman, the Congresswoman-elect from Arizona, who would provide the decisive votes to release more material. So, yeah, certainly that would be, any association with further embarrassment for Trump.
And
But we don't know
also
that
the book that Virginia Giuffre wrote said she never saw him around there. And I'm not doing his bidding. I'm just saying there's enough things to talk about Donald Trump without talking about what's not been proved.
The bottom line is that his administration, whether they're protecting Trump or whoever else, they protect people who can buy their way to the White House. That's what this administration is all about. And I think that all the rest of America who recognizes that, there are people who play by one set of rules and people who play by the rest. There are people who are getting tax breaks. There are people who can buy pardons. And there's all the rest of us just trying to afford a home. That's a reality for Americans today. And the more that Democrats can speak to that other America, the real America, actually, the people who are trying to play by the rules and get ahead and maybe even just be able to go on vacation once a year.
Right.
Then we're going to help them. And
Well, I mean, that makes sense. There's a long leap from that to what you said. I just want to be very clear. There's enough to talk about Donald Trump, without making that assumption. If you want to make that assumption, you can do that on the floor.
I mean,
Oh my God. Twisting themselves into pretzels.
Can you imagine what was
Watching
going
the
through the
world.
IFB
Yeah.
in that?
Jonathan Lemire is a serious person. And watching him be like, well, we knew they were. What? Connect the dots for people. No, you can't say things that aren't untrue, but you can connect the dots for people because there have been credible witnesses, lawsuits, stories written. I mean, my God. And I think that that's probably, and maybe you guys, agree or disagree with this, that's a combination of MSNBC lawyers, a fear of being sued because Donald Trump just sues everyone for $1 billion. But also, I think that that's Joe Scarborough being like, I don't want to piss off my friend Donald Trump.
after he tried to get the friendship back on track by running down to Mar-a-Lago, he and Mika, and bending the knee and then being offended that the rest of us were offended.
So
Yelled at us on air, basically, for being
Yes.
upset about it.
yes. And the other day he had on John Fetterman in his parade of the traitorous 8 senators. Fetterman was the latest.
Yep.
And they both commiserated about getting crap for going to Mar-a-Lago and having dinner with Trump. Oh, poor pitiful them.
Yeah.
Scarborough has always been Scarborough, but it's gotten worse, obviously. And let me start here. I depend on Nicole Wallace every day.
Yes.
I need the sanity that she gives us. I depend on others in the from 4 o'clock on the MSNBC rundown. I watch Morning Joe, and people get mad at me. And why are you still watching that? I say, I watch so you don't have to.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Because I think I want to see where it goes. And it's frustrating as hell. And you look at the Senate story of the last week, and who does he have on? People like Chris Matthews, who say, oh, the Senate did the right thing, and Donnie friggin' Deutsch, and folks like that. And I can't, there was a time when I thought, okay, this is their tokenism in a way. But there was a moment, I've never said this in public before, but I think she'd be fine with this now. Joy Reid, when she was still there, and I was talking about various things at the corporation, and she said, remember, Jeff, it's a Republican company.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Comcast is a Republican company. This goes back to what you said at the beginning of the show. They're all owned now by big corporations. And listen, I taught entrepreneurial journalism. I'm a capitalist. I'm for journalism being profitable. But we go back to the story of capital and have to say that it's big, rich people who have taken over media. Are there still liberal journalists? Yes, there are, but it doesn't matter now.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, because I have a couple friends over at the Daily Show who I have worked with on other projects, and I talk to pretty often, because again, the work that I was doing at LP before what I do now, there's very few people who wade in the garbage and the sewage of right-wing media in the same way that the people at the Daily Show did
Yes.
do every day, in the way that I do. And, so we commiserate over those things. And my friend Matt Negrin, he's a writer and producer over at the Daily Show. We were just texting the other day about this, and he said that, the big conspiracy in mainstream media is that there's this, there's like this overcorrection because everyone's so liberal. He said, but it's not. The conspiracy is it's Republican, and they have protected Republicans for decades. And, they sit and watch on Snapstream, like Aaron Rupar, all of them do, and watch Fox News all day, every day. And I think that in a lot of ways, the Daily Show and other satirical, platforms they do the best job at shedding the light on the absurdity of Fox News and right-wing media in a way that nobody else has. I mean, it really has provided the success for the Daily Show. Fox News is, and I think they go together, but no one else has been able to expose them and their hypocrisy in the way that they have.
Amen. But it's not going to last. Even though Jon Stewart signed another contract, it's not
Only
going to
for a
last. It's
year.
now part of Ellison Inc.
Right. And it was only a 1-year renewal.
Right. And
Stewart.
Colbert was already axed, and
Yep.
Jimmy Kimmel, they tried to axe,
Yep.
which is first they came for the immigrants, first they came for the trans kids, first they came for the women. But when they came for the comedians, when they came for Jimmy Kimmel, now we're finally going to have a furor over it. And I was part of that furor, and I agree. But for God's sakes, why haven't we had this furor before?
Right.
Because it's one of them, right? Like, I love Jimmy Kimmel. He's great. I think he's done a really good job. He, of course, did not deserve any of this. But now they're coming for the really wealthy white guy with a huge platform.
Yeah.
Yep.
The Jimmies, all the Jimmies. Yeah.
Maybe next they'll come after the other white guy with a really big platform, like, oh, I don't know, Joe Scarborough, right? Like, all of a sudden, these people are looking in the mirror and saying, wait a second, I'm not trans, and I'm not here as an undocumented immigrant, and I'm not a woman who's been sexually harassed, and I'm not a child who's been preyed upon by unnamed pedophiles. Although I will say, and this is what if I were Seth Moulton, what I would have responded, you don't have to even find out what's in these Epstein files, which we will find out eventually. You just have to look at what Donald Trump has done since he's come back into office. Roy Moore, everybody was a liar. He supported Roy Moore. He tried to make Matt Gaetz attorney general after an underage girl said that she had sex with him for $400 so she could get her braces.
Right.
And, of course, look at what he's doing with Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yep.
All the Epstein women who used to be girls are liars. The whole thing's a hoax. Nothing ever happened. Ghislaine Maxwell's on her way to, playing with puppies right now and probably on her way to freedom very soon. Mm-hmm. So, what more do we have? And he's trying his best to prevent the files from coming out, which, I don't know. Why would he do that if there's nothing to see there? So, the crazies are not the Seth Moultons of the world who are use common sense. The crazies are the people like Morning Joe, like Joe Scarborough, Mika, who are jumping through hoops to try to excuse this behavior. And frankly, I don't understand how anybody watches that and says that these people are even remotely journalists. I mean, everybody's going after Michael Wolff, which I want to talk to you about in a moment, but how is that any different than access journalism that you're watching practiced on MSNBC right now with Morning Joe, or on CNN right now with Scott Jennings, who they have on board because he talks to Trump every so often? It's all the same bullshit. And everybody's going crazy. Oh my God, Michael Wolff, he's not a real journalist. How could he? How could he? How is it any different?
Yeah.
I'm not excusing Michael Wolff. I'm just saying I don't see much daylight there.
Well, Michelle, as you quoted Scarborough a few minutes ago, he was calling Trump a fascist. He was saying it. He was saying what the New York Times wouldn't.
Yeah,
and you think, oh, hallelujah, it's possible. But then, boom, turned.
Right. Is he a fascist or is he not? Or are you okay with it now?
Yeah.
Because if somebody's a fascist, why are you hanging out with them? Why are you going down to Mar-a-Lago? Would you, I'm not even trying to be cute about this. In the 1930s, in 1933, before Hitler actually started engaging in genocide on a mass scale, would you be going out to socialize with him in the Bavarian Alps?
So bringing it back to Germany, this is going to sound odd, but I did a very bad job of not paying attention in German class in high school and college. And Germans ask me, why would you study German? And I explain, because nobody liked the French teacher. But I still try to keep it going. And so I do go constantly to Die Zeit and the Süddeutsche Zeitung and Der Spiegel and try to see what they're saying. And with much help from Google Translate. And it's really interesting to me as a picture from the outside. And I just came back from Munich and speaking at a media conference there. So I wrote down some of their headlines. And the cover story on Der Spiegel is the God's warriors, how Trump is censoring thought. They call it, in the Süddeutsche Zeitung, the great dumbing of the country. Trump loves sadism. That the words of the most powerful man in the world now mean nothing. A reporter went to cover South by Southwest and said, why is fascism not the theme here? Another from Die Zeit is that, thanks America, it's over, basically. This is the kind of coverage we can expect from German journalists, and Lord knows, of course, they have the histories, plural, to understand that context and to deal with that. They had a kid's story explaining Elon Musk and why he's awful in Der Spiegel. They had a story about explaining that what Charlie Kirk said would classify him as a far-right extremist legally in Germany, right? So we can see decent journalism happening somewhere in the world. And the Germans, when I say this stuff, the Germans come back, no, it's not good enough. Fine, stipulated, Your Honor. But it's better than what we have, because they understand the history that occurred there.
Yep.
And I see a different journalism that occurs there that doesn't occur here. And why is Trump trying to reduce the visas for foreign journalists? Because he doesn't want even that. We're getting very isolated.
And before we came, right before we came on air today, you saw this breaking news that the court case in Georgia was being reopened into Trump's election tampering, that Fani Willis had to give up because of her own issues. What I think nobody's picking up on here and putting it in context. And I think if I were running CNN or MSNBC or programming them, this is the only thing to talk about. Is not that this court case is being restarted. It is that it is being restarted by a prosecutor who tried desperately to find somebody else to take the case, and nobody would take it because they were scared. And what does that say about the quote unquote democracy we live in today, where justice, when it's supposed to be blind and applied across the board equitably, is not being applied, not just to Trump, who, of course, nobody's going to prosecute him now that he's president, but even to Trump's allies. Nobody wanted to take that case. They all turned it down. These are not federal prosecutors. These are state prosecutors. And nobody wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And what else is there to say? We are living in Putin's Russia.
Yes. And you know, just as the Germans know a history, you know that well firsthand.
Yeah.
And what happened to shock? There's no shock in media. We are benumbed.
Yep.
They are benumbed. And we can all point to things happening every single day. And we hear that the trope now is, oh, if the Democrats did that, or could you ever imagine that we would think that would happen in America? Well, it is happening in America.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to Hannah Arendt, when she died, the last piece of paper in her typewriter was the heading for the last third of the book that she didn't finish. And it was about judging. And I think we have a terrible lack of judgment, a unwillingness to judge. Media will not judge Trump. They will not judge him as a fascist and an authoritarian. You might hear the word authoritarian occasionally, but they won't judge him as the malign and evil soul that he is. Neither will they judge Trump's voters. Oh, no, we can't piss them off because we want them from a business perspective, or we should be listening to them. But all you're listening to is these tropes.
Yeah, it's the Michael Jordan Republicans wear sneakers too, or whatever. You know, like they're just so afraid of upsetting anybody that they say nothing. And I think about, you know, the history, and I think about Germans being able to look at themselves in the mirrors and know their own history and be able to speak to that. And, you know, I'm in my 40s. And so in my age group, our grandfathers crossed oceans to fight fascism in other parts of the world. It's never been in our backyards here before. Yep. And I feel like that's the difference with them is it's tangible. It's around them. Like the history is around them, and they're reminded of it all the time. And they understand what the consequences are in a different way. And I think that, you know, this American exceptionalism that we have been sold our entire lives, you know, will be our downfall. It's because we cannot imagine a world in which America are the bad guys and we're the bad guys, and we're doing it to ourselves. And that's, you know, and to the Charlie Kirk part of this too, which I still cannot get over, that no one could say in the days after this man was brutally murdered. I think we can all agree that's terrible. It should never happen. But I don't have to look at the guy and think that he was a good person just because he died tragically. And, you know, at the Seneca Project, I put together a 7-minute video putting together all of the most horrible things. And the first version of it was an hour long, just FYI. And I got it down to 7 minutes, and it went super viral. It got like millions of views because, again, like I sat there with my colleague, Tara Setmayer, and I was like, I can't take this another moment. I cannot continue to watch the headlines and watch cable news, not say the things, and fire Matthew Dowd for saying a very obvious fact about Charlie Kirk. I said, you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to him. And listen to him for 7 minutes say some of the most atrocious, misogynistic, racist things. And I think, you know, and a lot of people reached out to us saying, thank you so much for putting this together. Thank you for connecting the dots. I shared this with my family. I shared this with my kids. That's the work that the media needs to be doing. That is it. That's it. That's the story. I mean, it's storytelling at the end of the day. You have to be able to tell the story, and it's persuasive, and you don't have to editorialize it. You know, you just have to put it together and present it to people. Yeah. Receipts. Exactly.
So I'm curious to hear each of you where you think this could end. My fear is, and it's going to be fairly obvious. Let's go back to Germany. Germany was completely destroyed, and only out of those ashes could something that would appear to be new rise. So let's be clear that the AfD is rising in power, and there's fear there, and it could go south again. But they were defeated. Not only did fascism not come to our shores, but we've not really been defeated here. And the Civil War, I'm coming to see, I mean, everything is about race in this country. And I'm coming to see that the Civil War didn't end. It still is fought. And now it's turning out differently. And now the South is rising again and has won so far.
Yeah.
And we never had that cauterization. We never had that destruction that says sense should come in. And is there any, I'm too old to maybe see the pendulums that we always think swing back. And is there any hope that sanity might return, or do we have to witness our destruction before we can get there?
It's funny that funny is not the word. It's interesting that you say this, Jeff, because I've been saying this and thinking this for a long time with horror. So I don't think about this much, because if I thought about it all the time, my head would explode. But, if you want to go back to Germany and use that as one example, and then use the collapse of the Soviet Union as a separate example. Yep. The collapse of the Soviet Union it inflicted a tremendous amount of economic pain, but it did not inflict mass death and destruction on its people. And so therefore, it was only a few years later that the rise of another authoritarian was able to take place, because that tendency to understand what authoritarianism does to you did not really penetrate for people, because there wasn't enough pain inflicted.
Yeah.
My fear, and I say this with massive trepidation, is that, the pendulum swings, but we saw what happened in the last election. It swung towards Biden, and then it swung back, because people didn't really suffer under the first Trump regime enough.
Yeah.
And it may be that Trump, I don't think he's ever leaving, quite honestly, whatever the Constitution says. I just think there's too much risk for him to go, even if it's J.D. Vance who he installed. So he doesn't trust anybody but himself. And so, this can go one of three ways, right? Either I'm pleasantly surprised and Trump, becomes a Cincinnatus and goes back to his plow, which I think we all agree is not going to happen. The other alternative to this is that Trump dies in office, but that doesn't get rid of the cancer that is Trumpism. And the third is that we live through such horror that only then does something better rise from it. But we shouldn't wish that, because that will inflict just mass death and destruction, because short of that, it's just an ideological difference, right? You have this large segment of this country who truly believes that Trumpism is the future. And I know something I wanted to ask you about, I know we don't have much time left here, but something else I wanted to ask you about is we now have AI, which effectively is teaching. I mean, you have bots that are being programmed to say that up is down and black is white. So truth is not even something that's going to be much understood if AI continues on its path, because if I write enough nonsense, and if you write enough nonsense, and if everybody else writes enough nonsense, ChatGPT and everybody else is going to take that as fact and teach that as reality.
This is where I have a contrarian view as a member of the content industry.
Okay.
I believe that from a legal perspective, and I'm no lawyer, that training AI is with us.
Right.
There's no escaping it.
Right.
And it can do some amazing things. It's also being oversold by a cult of these doomsters, these AI boys. And for your audience, if you haven't looked up TESCRAAL, have you heard of TESCRAAL before? Nope. It's an acronym for the crazy philosophies that guide these AI boys: transhumanism, effective altruism, long-termism,
an expert in that. Yeah.
Oh, the Curtis Yarvins of the world.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
So if
I
you
can't.
if you look up TestGrail, you'll come across some very good research on it,
Yeah.
and that's what's guiding these AI crazy boys who have all the money and are doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
But the technology itself does some amazing things, and it's with us, I think, no matter what. And we in media have to look at it, I think, differently. So I believe that training these systems is fair use and transformative. And we journalists read each other, and the fact that the machine reads us too, I don't get upset about. Whether you get quoted at length is a matter of licensing, that's a different question. But here's my concern. Exactly what you just said, Julie, that all the spouted nonsense in the world is what is being used to train these systems. Meanwhile, what responsible media are doing is screaming in their entitlement that you can't take our stuff, and we have hid everything that might be considered truthful behind paywalls, both to people and to machines. And so, what is our higher obligation to an informed society and public discourse? And yes, I want to support journalists, and I want to support you, and I want to see you make a living at doing what you're going to be doing here. But we also have to have a conversation. If we think we have a public mission as journalists, and as civil servants, and as politicians too, then what is our responsibility to the information ecosystem that is going to exist now? And I worry greatly about this because you see, not only is our big old media dying and being taken over in its final death throes to be exploited, now, of course, the Ellisons are also in charge of TikTok. And Twitter, I will not call it X, is the house organ of the far right.
Right.
And so we see that these things that should be our alternatives aren't. So I think we've got to try to support open source and federated technologies and other alternatives. And that sounds frustrating because it's so nebulous, but I think it matters. I made the mistake of, when I survived 9/11 at the World Trade Center, that's when I started my blog.
Right.
My blog's on WordPress now, and it's open source, and I've been doing that. Along came Twitter, and I went, squirrel. And I moved a chunk of my public discourse, not that anybody could care, but
we
to
all
Twitter.
did. Yeah.
Right. I didn't support that open source protocol that was the essence of the internet. And I think there's an opportunity now with both the internet and AI to support open source and to try to have alternatives to the AI jerks and their testosterone-fueled nightmares coming from Peter Thiel and company, who are really running the country now.
But I'll tell you, I'll tell you the dilemma here, and this is, I struggle with this every day because I paywall my Substack, and the reason I paywall my Substack is because I need to make money,
eat.
right?
Yeah.
I gotta eat, and it takes an awful lot of work because I don't just spout off. I research, I source, so I paywall, and every single day I have at least one person, and sometimes many more, emailing me and saying, how dare you, and this is information, if you really think this is information people need to know. And the dilemma for me is that somebody like a Ben Shapiro got $5.6 million from a bunch of from two coal billionaires to launch his media empire, and he could make all of it free and open source because the bad guys were paying him to do that.
Yeah,
there is no democratic. Like if I were Michael Bloomberg, I would stop with everything else he's doing. And you want to invest, or anybody else who's a pro-democracy billionaire, of which there are few.
Reid Hoffman
Hoffman. Somebody stop investing in campaigns and start building something that survives any political cycle. I say that as a Democratic consultant, right? But those people aren't doing that, right? They always go for the shiny object, which is, where's my next Barack Obama? I'm going to invest in that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And, Barack Obama came and Barack Obama went, and Ben Shapiro doesn't give a rat's ass whether it's Donald Trump in the White House or anybody else. He's building something for the ages. Same with Charlie Kirk. They just happen to hit the jackpot with Trump. But when Trump is gone, he shuffles off this mortal coil. It'll be somebody else because they're building an ecosystem.
Yes.
And so from my perspective, you're absolutely right. Open source is absolutely the way to go. And that is the only way to fight AI, to make sure that AI actually, I put my own name into ChatGPT when it first came online. I would say 40 to 45% of what I read about myself was just false. I mean, it was just a matter of debate. It just wasn't accurate. But yet, if you're some kid and you're doing a report on me or you or anybody else, you're going to go to ChatGPT and that's going to come up. Same with Wikipedia. Wikipedia had stuff about me that was just not accurate. But of course, it's in Wikipedia. You're going to think it's accurate. And I don't mean stuff that's a matter of opinion, like stuff that said I grew up in London and in Paris. I never grew up in London and Paris. Like it just never happened.
If only nice places, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, would have loved to, but those were not places I grew up. So, I say that all to say that that's what you're competing with. You're competing with people who have no choice but to paywall stuff versus the moral imperative. And I understand where people get upset. They're like, if this is so important, I want to read it. Why won't you let me read it?
Yeah.
I don't have $8 a month to pay. And I get it. It's not cheap. But I don't know how to balance that. And I guess that's my dilemma.
One thing I've been arguing lately, and I'm spitting into the wind, I know, is that the deals that have been made with the AI companies and media companies are not licensing deals. They're silence pacts. When Rupert Murdoch takes a bucket of money from one of these companies, it's so that he won't sue and he won't lobby for legislation against them. Right. And that leaves out the vast ecosystem of news. And I've argued that news should get together. By that, I mean the real down below the big old guys and the hedge funds and such, and the independents should get together and create an API for news and go marching to the AI companies and saying, we're going to make it easy for you, but let's talk. Let's talk about money. It's not going to be huge buckets of money, but let's talk about fair recompense. Let's talk about branding. Let's talk about placement. Let's talk about use and links. But here, we're going to make it available to you. I think academic publishers do the same thing. And I think independent, not Nazi Substack people could join together and create a network, even underneath a Substack and even in other places like Beehive, and say, what can we do together? Can we contribute 5% of our content to something that is more open? Can we go negotiate with the AI companies to say, you need this here, and we'll make it possible for you to have it so that we can then compete with Shapiro and the money behind them? We've got to try to organize in this way. Massive big media dies, a whole bunch of little things rise up, and I celebrate that. But we still have to compete with the big massive stuff, and we have to figure out how to do that.
Yes, and not just compete with the big massive stuff like the New York Times, which you and I could have criticisms, and we could all have criticisms about, but is trying to, it really does engage in journalism, regardless of
absolutely.
Here. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how if AI takes free content from liars, but because those liars are being funded through other sources, but people who are trying to actually do real journalism, real analysis, are having to paywall their stuff because nobody's funding them, and this is how they eat. Who do you think is going to be developing the truth? The truth will eventually not be the truth. It will be, the Ministry of Truth. It'll be 1984.
Right. The truth won't out. The crap will out.
The crap will
and I'm on 2 AI podcasts. So every week I go through AI news, and I also have taken the habit of reading every paper on the preprint server, archive.org, that mentions AI.
Yeah.
I don't read them all. I look at the headlines, and most of them I don't understand. There's 500 to 700 a week. But in there, I find a dozen a week that are interesting. And I see patterns. I see the brands, marketing brands, are dying to be part of AI. So they're going to make themselves as available as they possibly can. And obviously disinformation is making itself available. And there was one study I read recently that said that of the sample of responsible media sites, they were all blocking up to 15 AI bots. But the irresponsible sites, the disinformation sites, are all there to be found. Right. Another study found that you don't have to work hard to poison AI. All you have to do is put crap out there into that ecosystem. And AI is going to become more and more and more poisoned. So we've got to have conversation about what we do in response to that. And I don't hear that conversation happening.
That is probably the most urgent conversation that we can possibly be having right now. More urgent than what's happening to corporate media, more urgent than it's all of the piece, right? It's all part of that ingredient.
It is.
But that is the holistically most important conversation we have, because we are moving towards a post-truth world that is defined by a bunch of algorithms.
Yeah.
It's not being corrupted by people like Elon Musk who purposely want to corrupt it. And if I were, if I were Elon Musk, I would find 100 content creators who are on whatever platforms that they know ChatGPT. Not, I mean, Grok, he can program any way he wants, but on ChatGPT and others that we know ChatGPT and others look at, and pay them $1 million each or whatever it is to just put their stuff out for free. And say, I will support you because I need to program not just my own AI platform.
I need to corrupt the rest.
I mean, that is what I would be doing. I would be doing that if I were Elon Musk. That is the best use of his billions of dollars.
And so what's happening instead is you see the lobbyist for newspapers and magazines, the NMA, is going to Congress and demanding, and then they're making it a fight about copyright. It's not. It's far past that. And we have to have it on a whole different level, but we're not having that discussion, and legislators aren't helping at all.
No, and they don't know how anything works. I mean, I think back to when Mark Zuckerberg, right, was testifying before Congress, and you had all of the members. I don't know if it was the Senate or I don't exactly remember, but they were like, "How does it work? And what's Facebook?" And they can't keep up with any of it. So if we, the people who are in charge and whose job it is to regulate this stuff, can't keep up or don't have people on staff, that's the other thing. Is like, why aren't members of Congress and the Senate, why aren't they staffing up with people who know how all of this works? That's very, very frustrating as well, and dangerous.
Yeah, and I think also where it's problematic is that you saw this happening when Mark Zuckerberg went and testified on the Hill. These members of Congress don't even know how to use Facebook. Never mind.
They don't. Let alone AI. Sam Altman can go and wow them and do stuff.
Right.
And here's one of the ironies of this, though. One of the things that we depend upon greatly in the open source world is Llama, which is the model from Meta. And Jan LeCun, who's been the head of AI strategy at Meta, just announced, he hasn't announced yet, but the FT reports he's leaving. He's been a great advocate of open source. And Llama is used by startups and universities all over. Zuckerberg has started prevaricating on that. And if he pulls back from openness there too, if everything that's usable, whether it's news and information or education or technology, gets pulled back from any openness, we're screwed.
Yeah. We're screwed. And to Michelle's point, we don't have anybody in any position of power on the Hill to understand how this works. I'm in my 50s. I don't understand how it works, right? Never mind people in their 70s and 80s, for the most part, who are members of Congress or in leadership, who they don't know what they don't know. Because you made it your business to know, Jeff. But I work with these members of Congress and senators all the time. They don't know what they don't know.
Now, I was called to testify before a Commerce subcommittee on this, and next to me was the NMA, the lobbyist for newspapers and magazines, and the NAB, the lobbyist for broadcasters, and the president of Condé Nast. And I was the beard, so that they could say, well, we had somebody in here who disagrees, right?
Right.
And Marsha Blackburn, in her moments in the room, comes in and I asked ChatGPT to give me a poem tribute to Donald Trump, and it refused. But I asked it to give me a tribute to Joe Biden, and it did, and then she proceeded to recite it. That's the level at which the discussion is occurring.
But that's what I'm talking about, right? Like, Marsha Blackburn doesn't even appreciate how much her side of the aisle benefits from these people.
Yes.
Tremendously. Because they're not being censored themselves. They're not censoring themselves, I should say, the way we all have to, because censorship is not the right word, but we all have to because we have to earn a living.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Brian Baru, Media Network, would love to have Professor Jarvis on as a regular guest from now on. That's up to Professor Jarvis.
I would kill to.
Come on every day, because this is like the most fascinating discussion we've had in a really long time.
Yeah.
I'm delighted for the opportunity to do it, because you see the profound risk that we're at. And so we got to talk about that.
There's no question. There are so many things. Remember, before we came on, I said to Michelle, "Hey, Michelle, I want to talk to Professor Jarvis about the the Epstein files and specifically about what happened with all of these so-called journalists from the New York Times and others, the Michael Wolff. We never even got to that because there are more important things in life, believe it or not, than just what's happening there. So I think we actually do have to wrap it up because we've been going for over an hour and I need to get on the road before I get into really bad traffic. But it was so great to have you on. Thank you.
So great to be on. Thank you. I'm really grateful.
Please come back. This is such a great discussion, and we're going to distill it and put it up so people can get it in digestible bites too if they don't have time to watch the whole thing. So thank you so much. Michelle, anything else for the good of the order, or are we done?
No, I just, this was fascinating conversation. I think it's so important. And I think, you know, just another thing that Julie and I talk about also is like the bridge from culture into this as well. And it's like, how do you reach people? And you can't just reach people by, you know, regurgitating the information at them. You have to reach them through other means, through culture, through sports, music, all the other things. I think that's just another piece of this that's important, and figuring out how to do that in this next wave of new media is going to be a challenge, but the right is very good at it and we have to be good at it too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I very much look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you both.
It's great. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Bye everyone.
Bye.